Welcome to Dream Farm. Today is the 11th of March, and Jordan and I had planned today that we were going to do a burn here in the timber, just a small starter burn. We're having mixed thoughts on it. We tried call it a test or whatever you want to call it, a practice burn down by the buildings, and the wind was gusting down there, and it got in that dry grass, and it burned pretty aggressive, and we felt like we really didn't have a lot of control over it. We ended up putting it out, but I guess it's a lesson there that the amount of wind is at least as important as any other factor when you're burning, because when the wind wasn't gusting, it wasn't doing anything, and then boom, it would take right off.
Well, and another thing we saw too is like the wind was on paper out of the south, right?
Mm-hmm.
But up in those valleys and in those bluffs, it seemed like, because it was hitting it from the north, so it was kind of swirling down there, and it just wasn't super predictable very well.
No, and the other mistake we made, and granted we just were playing around, but we didn't have any fire breaks, so
literally playing with fire.
Yeah, we couldn't just light it and then just walk away, because there was nothing to stop it ultimately from going up into the trees and then continuing to go. So it wasn't like we had planned something there. We just lit one just to see what would happen, and the wind got it, and kind of, we ended up burning a pretty decent sized area, maybe a quarter of an acre or so. But so anyway, we're being a little bit more cautious now. I'm for going back in the woods here a little ways and starting another fire, but Jordan's a little bit on the squeamish side now after our experience this morning. So maybe I'll wait until she's taken her nap or whatever she does. And
gone for my run.
When she goes for her run, she'll come back and the whole hillside will be on fire. So anyway, that's where we're at. We've talked about it. Everybody talks about it. Is in order to do habitat really well, you kind of have to burn it once in a while. But there's like this inherent steep learning curve that we are very low on, very close to the bottom. So you got to figure it out somehow, and either you got to bring a crew in and they can sort of teach you, but at the end of the day, unless you've got your own crew, you're not doing anything. So I've got to figure out a way that a really small group, and potentially even just me, could set this up with the right fire breaks and burn. And it doesn't really matter whether you're in control of it or not if it's got fire breaks and it can't jump the breaks. So I guess that's what it boils down to. We just don't know enough to know about how big the fire breaks need to be, and will it burn across a a grassy roadway or whatever, so we just have a lot to learn. So that's where we're at. I might come back out later while Jordan is doing something else, but I don't see why a little small area I couldn't start it on fire.
I can list a few reasons, but I don't think you want to hear them.
Well, Dream Farm is brought to you by Whitetail Institute Food Plot Blends, Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail App, Hoyt Archery, Wildlife Farming, and PH Outdoors. We've been talking about burning on today's episode, and you know that I have a kind of a natural fear of getting this country started on fire and then not being able to control it. So I've got a couple of experts with me. I think I'm gonna phrase this as timber burning for dummies, and these guys aren't the dummies. I'm the dummy. So we're gonna kick around what you have to do. And Gregg Pattison is behind me. He's with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and then further to the right is Gregg Schmidt. He's with the Iowa DNR. So I've got experts on a couple levels here, but I want to know more so. Most of the videos I watch on YouTube, there's a big crew of guys. It'll be 6 or 8 guys, and they've got all their fancy equipment. And how do I get this done with just myself and Jordan and maybe a couple of people I can find on the streets, that are willing to come out and do something. So that's kind of the biggest challenge, I think, for a lot of us, is not how do the pros do it, but how do the dummies do it? How do you create manageable blocks of this timber that somebody with a small group like myself, a couple people, 3 people, how do you do that and still accomplish something? You know, it's that's the biggest challenge, I think. So,
I would say just you got to use the terrain. And first off, I always say don't fear fire, but respect it. You know. So
Yeah.
I mean, once you've done it a few times, it really, you know, you get more comfortable with it. It's easier to do. But using the terrain, having fire breaks already set up, you know, preparation for a burn is probably 80% maybe of the actual burn. And the woodland burns are different than prairie burns. They don't burn as intense. They are a lot slower. They creep. You actually have to a lot more time probably because they're going to go so slow through the understory. There's fuel. The flame height's not high. There's not a lot of fuel there in most cases. So you got to be prepared to take a little time and look out to the future too. What is going to be the weather the next day? Because you're going to catch some logs and stuff on fire. They're going to smolder maybe for a day. So if you got good conditions, and then all of a sudden you got wind, you know, that might be something to consider in embers. But again, the good fire breaks, the preparation ahead of time, using the terrain, ridge tops as fire breaks, ditches as fire breaks, ditches that are in, you know, along a ridge. Fire's going to burn faster uphill.
So I'm going to come back to that point that you're making, and you know, I think it rings loud and clear for me. Is you're not really taking risk once you start it on fire. The whole idea is to make sure that your preparation is thorough enough that you're not actually saying, "Oh boy, I hope this works."
Correct.
Right? Because if you're thinking when you put the drip torch and start tipping it over, if you're thinking like Jordan and I did yesterday on that little grass burn, like, "Boy, I hope this works," then you probably haven't done enough preparation.
Yeah, enough preparation. And really defining your area that you're going to burn. So having the perimeters scouted, know exactly what it is. Don't just think, well, on that side, it's not going to burn through that because there isn't any fuel there. Actually go and look. Go and look, and then make sure that the break is there. What we have right in front of us, you know, right here coming out of the timber is a disced up field. Mineral soil's your best break. It's not going to burn through that. You know, any trails that lead out to the property, two-track trails that are greened up in the spring, or don't have any fuel on them, or rock driveways, those make good ponds that actually have water in them. Make
my ponds will burn.
My
ponds will burn.
You know, but even just making sure they're sized right. Generally, you know, a timber burn isn't going to have huge flame lengths generally, unless you have some stockpile of fuel, you know, in some portion. So you're going to have shorter flame lengths generally, so you can get by with a little bit smaller, but having a wide enough
what would you consider wide enough for a timber burn? Like, because one of the things I envision us doing quite a bit is taking the leaf blower and blowing out, you know, just to make the sections small enough so they're manageable, so it doesn't just go. Like, let's say we started it here, we started rolling up through here. I don't really want it to go all the way to the neighbors before it hits our first fire break. I'd rather like stop it and then we can start over again.
You leaf litter right in the middle of the timbers, you know, a 3 or 4 foot wide leaf blown path is probably plenty.
Start with a deer trail, it's already kind of established, and a lot of times they're a little bit clear of leaf litter, but
And in the timber, once you blow the leaves, you're down to mineral soil most of the time. There may be some sedges or something growing in there, but it's usually fairly sparse. But, you know, kind of watch that if you're leaf blowing. You know, avoid areas that have a lot of grass or sedges growing in it that might be fuel, and try to get right to the mineral soil.
And back burning first too then, and another precaution where you're burning, setting the fire downwind and let it back into the wind. Is a great way to start on that backside, and get that burned away from that fire break, and then widen that out. So dirt is great, and then the next best thing is no fuel, right? So back burn away from those blown out fire lines, and then go around. Once you got that all established, the fire can't come across any of that, then go ahead and start.
Then you can push it harder.
Then you can start go
to the bottom and
go to the upwind side and let the wind help you, because in timber burns you need the wind a lot of times. You need lower humidity than a prairie grass fire.
And a lot of times in the timber burns, a low intensity fire going all the way through the timber is not a bad thing. You don't always have to have a real intense fire
but you get
going through the timber, because you can get it's that duration of time that fire's on the stems, if you're trying to reduce some of the woodies. And so a slow backing fire going through puts, you know, not as much intensity, but more time.
Yeah.
on there, and so it can actually have a good, or what we call a flanking fire, where you're kind of perpendicular with the wind, and it's just kind of not quite a head fire, but it's a little hotter than a backing fire, and those are just about perfect,
So,
conditions for
like
timber.
in this country here, would this be better to burn it down the hill, or is it okay? Like, let's say you get your fire break established on top, and then you back burn from that a little ways, whatever you need to do to create your fuel, shortage. Then you just burn up because it's gonna burn faster going up.
Yeah.
I mean, would it take too long? Would it be a bad idea to try to burn down?
If you have the time,
Yeah,
you
We're
can
talking
back it
a
down.
day,
But it
or
could,
two
it could take
days
a
to do
long
it.
time for it to come
Right.
down the hill.
Gotcha.
Things that you have to remember is that around here on these bluffs, there's slope to those hills, and as that fire's going up there, it's going to increase intensity, but it's also putting all that heat out in front of it.
Right.
So all of that heat is impacting some of those trees. So that's where you don't necessarily just want to light at the bottom and have a fire running all the way up the slope.
Yeah.
Because you can impact some larger trees, especially when you get kind of up towards
Well,
the ridge top. But you always want to, no matter what, you want to back off of your initial break and make sure that you're not hitting any of your fire lines or your fire breaks with a hot fire.
Unless you got tilled up field like this.
Well, you're right.
You could burn,
Right.
you would need a backfire from this. This is not gonna,
right.
fire won't run across this even with a head fire running into this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you're fine to do that, so.
So let's talk about wind and humidity as factors, because we've been looking at the forecast, and our humidity right now is pretty low. I mean, I've been seeing like mid-30s during the day and the afternoons. Is that too low of humidity, or is that still okay? And at what point do you have too much green, and where are we in that window? So I guess there's two questions, wind and humidity, and then, how long can we actually keep doing this? Because it's probably about prime now, right, for the next couple weeks for this? Or do we have longer than that?
I would say we had longer.
Okay, for timber burn.
Yeah, for timber, because it's not gonna green up as fast as a grass would.
Right.
Yeah.
But so yeah, so your humidity, the lower, I like a lower humidity, like in the 30s for a timber burn to carry it. So we're not sitting around all day waiting
Right.
for that fire. Where a prairie grass burn 30 is kind of the bottom. You don't want to burn less than 30 because it's just so intense, because that fuel load there's a lot more fuel.
Yeah.
Where we don't have the fuel here, the
Yeah.
fine
Yeah.
fuel. So
The other factor to think about when you're burning in the timbers too is we're in a drought.
Yeah.
So all of that wood in that timber is basically available to burn also.
Yeah.
It's not going to flare up necessarily like a western
you don't
wildfire
have a canopy
like
fire
that. It's
at
not
all.
going to have that type of
No.
fire, but you are going to have some of those logs and things start burning, and that may just increase your awareness that you may have stuff smoking and embers burning. So if you do have smaller fire breaks
Yeah.
in your woodland, you need to worry about that if the wind's going to kick up the next day
Right.
or something like that, because some of those could throw embers.
What
across
do you
the
try to put them out then in that situation, or do you just know that you have them and let them go? Because going around with enough water to put out a log that's smoldering would be an awful task.
We try to keep everything that's burning in, I'll say 50 feet.
yeah, I was gonna say, if it was
But-
right next to a fire line or where there's fuel available, like 10 feet across a fire line or something, those we
Yeah.
would put out. Yeah, but if
Yeah.
it's right in the middle of a 20-acre burn, then you can
You
let it
don't have to worry
smolder.
about that.
Yeah, it shouldn't.
Okay.
Unless, it shouldn't
Yeah.
be fine.
So really, I guess the takeaway is you need to do a lot of prep with fire breaks, and really know that once this thing goes, even if you feel like it's out of control, it's not going to jump a break.
Right.
That's
And I
the
just
key.
wait a lot of times till a lot of places I burn in the timber, there's grazed pasture
Mhm.
next to it. It's green grass.
Right.
Not now. You
Yeah.
know, so that's why I wouldn't burn now, but it will not go
Yeah,
across that green grass. I don't maybe even do a back burn on some of those areas because I know it's,
Mm-hmm.
100-foot wide green before we get to any field.
Yeah.
But on your case here, maybe you got a crop field that's pretty dry,
Yeah.
disc up.
The
Just as a
outer-
precaution, the
yeah.
outer, the fire might not ever get there. You don't plan to, but
Right.
it's not bad to wait until that's disced up or
Yeah.
disc it up yourself.
So we're still okay in the timber, even though we're getting green around it, as far as the burn, because
Yeah.
a lot of what we're burning is leaves.
Leaf litter.
Right.
You're carrying in the leaf
Yeah.
litter.
Yeah.
As long as you don't have a lot of stuff, the spring ephemerals and things blooming in
Yeah.
the woodland, you're probably good to go. we're in a strange spring, so things are coming quicker than normal
Yeah.
this spring. But you kind of have to watch that each year too. So the timing isn't on a calendar, but it's by what's happening in the
Okay. One last question, then we'll wrap this thing up. But when is the best time? Like one of the goals I have is to remove as much prickly ash as I can. I've got a little bit of bush honeysuckle, not much, not quite a bit, but some Japanese barberry. We've got multiflora rose. I mean, from the standpoint of trying to kill off the stuff that you want out of there, is there a best time to burn? You know, I know we've talked about that a little bit, Greg Schmidt, you know, about timing from that standpoint, but let's cover that and then we'll wrap it up.
I like to wait till it's kind of budded out. You know, that energy's out of its roots and into the stems of that prickly ash and all that stuff that we're trying to. That's the other thing is what's our objective. So timing, the objective depends on timing. So if we want to burn later to kill that brush better, you know, then we want to go with it later in the spring. But
well, what would be
we've had good luck during any of the dormant season, more in southern Iowa. I haven't done a lot of that up in here, but a lot of the dormant season has knocked back some of that brush and
you can even do fall burns if you're looking to clean just the litter up and get, you know, a better seed bed for falling oaks and for the spring ephemerals. That's better. You can do fall burns.
And it kind of, you have those fresh oak leaves at that time that are dry.
Yeah,
a lot of times,
really
especially in the oak woodland, and it burns through really nice.
So I guess probably my biggest goal is to kill off, because of all the TSI work we did and are doing. It's gonna be pretty aggressive. We're getting a lot of sunlight to the ground. I really don't want junk growing. So that's why the fire seems so important on this farm. You know, now is just to make sure that what comes in with these openings isn't going to be just junk. So a later in the spring burn is better.
And the great thing about oaks is they can handle being burned a few times. You know, they got a little seedling. You could burn them off. They'll resprout, you know, and then finally let it go. They'll really go. So oaks adapted to fire. So that's the beautiful thing about that. The honeysuckle and all that stuff you talked about is not.
Yeah.
So burning that is hard on it.
Burning that, and it may take a couple of burns or a few burns to really knock it back. But it gets you to that control level where you can go in and do some actual management on the site if you need to.
And that's
in there, and it cleans it up a lot better.
Okay, well that's going to be it for now. I'm going to burn next week, so we'll come back again and do a first burn episode. Maybe I'll get one of these guys or both of them to come back and laugh at me while we're doing it. But
I'll send my brother Steve up.
Everybody's got a brother Steve that they're trying to get rid of. Get rid of the other heir to your,
I might be
your parents.
So it's not really me.
Find somebody you don't like. No, that's good. Well, no, I appreciate it, guys, and great information. So viewers, check back again. This was the timber burn for dummies, and next week somewhere in there it's going to be the actual dummy making a timber burn. So we'll keep learning as we go. So I appreciate you joining me. We'll see you back here again soon for the next episode of Dream Farm, and remember to always dream big.